In chapter 25 of Exodus, Jehovah gave instructions on the three primary furnishings that are to be placed inside of the tabernacle sanctuary: the Ark of the Covenant, the table of showbread, and the menorah, the golden lampstand. And beginning in chapter 26, we get the instructions for the construction of the tabernacle itself. Now we're going to move fairly rapidly. We're going to cover all of Exodus chapters 26 and 27 and the first part of chapter 28, as well as some New Testament writings that are pertinent to our subject. So keep those Bibles open and handy. But for now, turn to Exodus chapter 26. If you have a complete Jewish Bible, it's page 89. Exodus chapter 26, page 89, if you have a complete Jewish Bible. You are to make the tabernacle with 10 sheets of finely woven linen and with blue, purple, and scarlet yarn. You are to make them with cherubim worked in that have been crafted by skilled artisans. Each one is to be 42 feet long, 6 feet wide. All the sheets are to be the same size. 5 sheets are to be joined into one into another, and the 5 sheets are to be joined one to another. Make loops of blue on the edge of the outermost sheet in the first set. Do the same on the edge of the outermost sheet of the second set. Make 50 loops on the one sheet, 50 loops on the edge of the sheet in the second loop. The loops are to be opposite one another. Make 50 fasteners of gold and couple the sheets to each other with the fasteners so that the tabernacle forms a single unit. You are to make sheets of goat's hair to be used as a tent covering the tabernacle. Make 11 sheets. Each sheet is to be 45 feet long and 6 feet wide. All 11 sheets are to be the same size. Join 5 sheets together and 6 sheets together and fold the 6-sheet double at the front of the tent. Make 50 loops on the edge of the outermost sheet in the first set and 50 loops on the edge of the outermost sheet in the second set. Make 50 fasteners of bronze. Put the fasteners in the loops. Join the tent together so that it forms a single unit. As for the overhanging part that remains of the sheets forming the tent, the half sheet remaining is to hang over the back of the tabernacle. And the 18 inches on the one side and the 18 inches on the other side of that remaining in the length of the sheets forming the tent is to hang over the tabernacle to cover it on each side. You are to make a covering for the tent of tanned ram skins and an outer covering of fine leather. Make the upright planks for the tabernacle out of acacia wood. Each plank is to be 15 feet long and 2¼ feet wide. There are to be 2 projections on each plank, and the planks are to be joined one to another. That is how you're to make all the planks for the tabernacle. Make the planks for the tabernacle as follows: 20 planks for the south side facing southward. Make 40 silver sockets under the 20 planks, 2 sockets under one plank for its 2 projections, 2 sockets under another plank for its 2 projections. For the second side of the tabernacle to the north, make 20 planks and their 40 silver sockets, 2 sockets under one plank, 2 under another. For the rear part of the tabernacle towards the west, make 6 planks. For the corners of the tabernacle, excuse me, in the rear, make 2 planks. These are to be double from the bottom all the way to the top, but joined at a single ring. Do the same with both of them. They are to form the 2 corners. Thus there will be 8 planks with their silver sockets, 16 sockets, 2 sockets under one plank, 2 under another. Make crossbars of acacia wood, 5 for the planks on the one side of the tabernacle, 5 crossbars for the planks of the other side of the tabernacle, 5 crossbars for the planks at the side of the tabernacle at the rear towards the west. The middle crossbar, halfway up the planks, is to extend from end to end. Overlay the planks with gold. Make gold rings for them through which the crossbars will pass, and overlay the crossbars with gold. You are to erect the tabernacle according to the design you have been shown on the mountain. You are to make a curtain of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and finely woven linen. Make it with the cherubim worked in, that they have been crafted by a skilled artisan. Hang it with gold hooks on 4 acacia wood posts overlaid with gold and standing in 4 silver sockets. Hang the curtain below the fasteners. Then bring the ark for the testimony inside the curtain. The curtain will be the divider for you between the holy place and the especially holy place. You are to put the ark cover on the ark of the testimony in the especially holy place. You are to put the table outside the curtain, and the menorah opposite the table on the side of the tabernacle towards the south. Put the table on the north side. For the entrance to the tent, make a screen of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and finely woven linen. It should be in colors, the work of a weaver. For the screen, make 5 posts of acacia wood, overlay them with gold, and cast for them 5 sockets of bronze. Okay. We've already discussed that the tabernacle was divided into 3 zones of varying degrees of holiness. The Holy of Holies being the greatest, the holy place with slightly less holiness, and the outer court, the place of least holiness. Also recall that the perimeter of the tabernacle was basically a fence that was made out of cloth that enclosed an open courtyard. The tent portion, which consisted only of the Holy of Holies and the holy place, was the only portion of the tabernacle that had a roof. Now, understanding there is some disagreement over exactly how long in modern measurement a cubit was, the general consensus is that the perimeter of the outer court was about 150 feet long and 75 feet wide. The tabernacle was always erected in an east-west orientation, with the tent portion more towards the western end. And a large 30-foot wide gateway was placed at the east end of the courtyard, and the entrance into the tent also then faced east. Now, since the tabernacle was meant to go wherever God directed Israel to move, it had to be mobile. Its design was quite ingenious. The specifications were given obviously meant for it to be assembled and disassembled and then transported multiple times. It would be like to have made, it would have to have been made to withstand the daunting conditions of the desert with its oven-like dryness, the fierce winds laden with fine sand that was an ever-present bother, yet it was also not made of lightweight materials. It had to be rugged, so it was heavy. Now, we're not going to get into it today, but the book of Numbers tells us that the precious metals alone totaled 8 tons, and the wood for construction would have weighed several tons. Even the cloth and the ram skins would have been of considerable weight. Numbers also tells us that several covered wagons pulled by teams of oxen were used to transport the tabernacle. However, all indications are that the furnishings of the tabernacle, including the ark, the menorah, the tables of showbread and incense, these were hand carried. Now, various clans that formed the tribe of Levi were given specific articles that they were to carry. To handle these articles any other way was a trespass against the God of Israel. The curtain that ringed the outer court was made of finely woven linen sheets, and they were held in place by acacia wood pillars with bronze. Bronze sockets were placed at the bottom of each pillar, and ropes were tied from the top of each pillar to the ground, held in place with bronze stakes. Let me just pause for a minute and mention to you, if you've ever been able to go to Shiloh in Israel, and you will see there the outline of it, and you can actually see post holes in the ground there from when the tabernacle was first erected in the land. It's quite amazing. So you can get a better sense for what this must have looked like. Now notice all the use of bronze. Since this outer area was where humanity, normal lay people, could enter, this non-precious metal was used in its construction. From a practical aspect, the bronze was a lot harder, more useful for construction than gold or silver. And at the top of each pillar, however, was a silver cap and some silver bars or hooks from which the courtyard curtains were hung. Now the yarn colors chosen to make the curtains, blue, purple, and scarlet, made the endeavor all the more expensive because these particular colors were hard to make. And we're told that apparently some or all of these linen sheets had pictures of cherubim, CHERUBIM, woven into them. I can't really explain the significance of these mysterious cherubim as much as I wish I could, except to say that they were obviously an important element to God. And since this was Jehovah giving this narrative on the details of his tabernacle, since it has been made clear numerous times that the wilderness tabernacle is a physical, earthly representation of the heavenly spiritual tabernacle, it must be that God employs numerous cherubim in service to him, probably as guardians of his holiness. Now further, that the cherubim have this unusual privilege, we find out, of being nearest to God, even interacting with God in his heavenly throne room. Well, the tent, the sanctuary itself, was about 45 feet long, 15 feet wide, 15 feet tall. It was divided into two rooms. The holy place was the larger of the two rooms, about 30 by 15. The Holy of Holies was a 15 by 15 by 15 cube. And as we might expect, the acacia wood used in the sanctuary was covered in gold rather than the more common bronze as was used outside in the people's court. Now the gold would have reflected the light in a most useful and magnificent way. I mean, can you imagine the warm color of amber that the room would have taken on with the light reflected from literally gold walls? Acacia wood planks were used to help form the structure of the sanctuary, and these planks were completely encased in gold. Well, the entire gold and wood structure of the tent was covered and protected with a covering that consisted of 4 layers. The innermost covering was of fine linen. Next to it was woven goat hair. Now, goat hair was the most common material used for making tents in that era. The vast bulk of the Israelites would have used woven goat hair tents for themselves because it was plentiful, it was durable, it was strong, and depending on the tightness of the weave, somewhat waterproof, although rain wasn't that big of a problem where they were wandering. Covering the goat hair now was a layer of ram skins. They'd been dyed red. And finally, the outermost layer, which had to face this harsh desert weather. Now, this outer layer is a little bit of a mystery because the Hebrew word used for it is tachash. Tachash. It just referred to some type of animal skin. Many translators make this tachash out, like in our Complete Jewish Bible, to say it's a high grade of leather, fine leather. But that defies logic because tanned leather, like from cattle, was common. And it was a common understood, there was a common understood word to describe it. Tachash is an unusual, it's an uncommon word. And it's used only in the context of the wilderness tabernacle. It has been claimed by Jewish scholars for centuries that the outer covering was either seal or porpoise skins. Obviously, because it would have been airtight, water repellent, and even offered protection then from the superfine dust that was part of desert life. Now, it should be no surprise that either seal or porpoise, perhaps both, were used as the Israelites were very near the Red Sea. And those two sea creatures were very plentiful there. Now, I imagine they bartered for them from local seaside residents, or else some of the more well-to-do Israelites might have just brought some with them from Egypt. But I doubt that, as it wouldn't have been a common material used in Egypt. Well, the main entrance into the tent, which would take one into the holy place, was called the door. In Hebrew, masach. And one had to walk through the holy place to get into the Holy of Holies. A veil, a curtain called paroket in Hebrew, separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies. In Hebrew, the name of the holy place is Kodesh. The Holy of Holies is Kodesh HaKodeshim. Now let's move on to Exodus chapter 27. You are to make the altar of acacia wood 7.5 feet long, 7.5 feet wide. The altar is to be square and 4.5 feet high. Make horns for it on its four corners. The horns are to be of one piece with it. You are to overlay it with bronze. Make its pots for removing ashes, its shovels, basins, meat hooks, and fire pans. All its utensils you are to make of bronze. Make for it a grate of bronze netting. And on the four corners of the netting, make 4 bronze rings, and put it under the rim of the altar so that the netting reaches halfway up the altar. Make poles of acacia wood for the altar. Overlay them with bronze. Its poles are to be put into the rings. The poles are to be on both sides of the altar for carrying it. The altar is to be made of planks and hollow inside. They are to make it just as you were shown on the mountain. Here is how you are to make the courtyard of the tabernacle. On the south side, facing southward, are to be tapestries for the courtyard made of finely woven linen, 150 feet for one side, supported on 20 posts in 20 bronze sockets. The hooks on the posts and the attached rings for hanging are to be of silver. Likewise, along the north side are to be tapestries 150 feet long, hung on 20 posts and 20 bronze sockets, with silver hooks and rings for the posts. Across the width of the courtyard on the west side are to be tapestries 75 feet long, hung on 10 posts and 10 sockets. The width of the courtyard on the east side, facing east, will be 75 feet. The tapestries for one side of the gateway will be 22.5 feet long, hung on 3 posts and 3 sockets. For the other side, there will be tapestries 22.5 feet long on 3 posts and 3 sockets. For the gateway of the courtyard, there is to be a screen 30 feet long, made of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and finely woven linen. It should be in colors, the work of a weaver. It is to be on 4 posts in 4 sockets. All the posts, all the way around the courtyard, are to be banded with silver and to stand in sockets of bronze. The length of the courtyard is to be 150 feet and the width 75 feet everywhere, with the height 7.5 feet. The tapestries and screen are to be of finely woven linen, their sockets to be of bronze. All the equipment needed for every kind of service in the tabernacle, as well as the tent pegs for the tabernacle and for the courtyard, are to be of bronze. You are to order the people of Israel to bring you pure oil of pounded olives for the light, and to keep a lamp burning continually. Aaron and his sons are to put it in the tent of meeting, outside the curtain in front of the testimony, and keep it burning from evening until morning before Adonai. This is to be a permanent regulation throughout all the generations of the people of Israel. Well, just as the ark was the most holy and important item inside the tent sanctuary, the brazen altar is the most holy and important item outside of the sanctuary. Therefore, the design and placement of the great altar of sacrifice is also all important. This is where countless millions, think about that, millions of innocent animals will have their lives taken from them, their blood spilled, their bodies burned up into ashes, all necessary to atone for mankind's sins in order for God's worshipers to remain at peace with God. Now, often this altar is called the brazen altar. In Hebrew, it's called Mizbah HaOlah. Brazen simply means that it was made from the hardest metal they had to work with in those times, bronze, a mixture of iron and copper. So altar of sacrifice, altar of burnt offering, brazen altar, all of these are referring to the same thing. For all practical purposes, the altar was a special fire pit. It was a portable box that was constructed with acacia wood as a frame and then covered over with bronze so it wouldn't catch fire. It was about 7.5 feet long on each side, a little under 5 feet high. 4 horns were molded into it, one on each corner. Now these horns were used to tie the sacrificial animal to it during the sacrificial procedure. And whether there was spiritual significance to these horns or whether they were there strictly for practical reasons is an open question. Altars of the Canaanites have been found, and several of these had horns on them as well. Many tools and implements for use with the altar were required, and they too were fashioned from bronze. This included shovels to deal with the spent ashes, pails and buckets to catch the animal blood, censers, sometimes called fire pans, to carry hot coals, and then special shovel pans to carry the ashes outside of the camp to be disposed of. And just as with the Ark of the Covenant, rings were attached to the sides of the altar so that the wooden poles could be inserted through the rings as a means to transport the altar when the time came to move the tabernacle facilities at Jehovah's command. The altar was not moved by being placed onto a wagon. It had to be hand carried from location to location, hence the use of the poles. Well, the altar was placed just inside the gate of the outer court. Now, as I had pointed out last week, when Moses had been told to build an altar on which to sacrifice animals to seal the covenant between Israel and Jehovah, the covenant of Moses, God had him place it outside of the holy area, which was on the slope of Mount Sinai. Instead, it was to go to the valley floor, beyond that stone fence that acted like a barrier, an area that could be accessed by the people day and night. So true to form now, the brazen altar was placed outside of the holy area of the tabernacle, the sanctuary, and into the outer court where people, the regular people, the lay people, had access to it. And by the way, this most certainly means that the stone altar where the covenant sealing sacrifice had occurred must have been decommissioned once the brazen altar was built and it was operational. Now, the placement of the altar was significant. It was set between the outer court gate and the entrance to the holy place. One had to pass by the altar to get to the sanctuary. In fact, each time before a priest could enter the sanctuary, he had to make a sacrifice. This is a prophetic and symbolic teaching on the purpose of Yeshua. We have to pass through the sacrifice of Christ in order to enter the sanctuary of God. Now, probably the best symbol that we could use to help us understand this connection between the brazen altar and Jesus would be the cross. That is, the cross was to Christ what the brazen altar was to those sacrificial animals. The animals had to be raised up, placed on the altar, bound to the horns of the altar, and they had to have their blood spilled to atone for Israel's sins. Christ had to be raised up on a cross to which he was bound, and he had to have his blood spilled for Israel's and for mankind's sins. Certainly the plan also made provision for Gentiles, non-Israelites, to be mysteriously joined to Israel in order that we might partake in their covenants with God. But that's the only way it could happen. One had to be grafted into Israel's covenants with Jehovah in order to benefit by what Christ did. so that those of you who are newer to this congregation won't take this wrong. I do not mean one has to become a physical national Jew to become a believer. Nor does one need to convert and then begin practicing Judaism. The term grafting or grafted in is a metaphor. It's used from a spiritual point of view, not physical. It occurs when by faith, a spiritual act, by faith, you trust Yeshua as your Savior and Lord. Listen to what Paul says in Romans 2 and 3 about this. Romans 2 and 3. We're going to read just a few verses of this. 2:17 through Romans 3:4. He says this. I'll read it for you. You don't have to go there. But if you call yourself a Jew, and you rest on Torah, and you boast about God, and know His will, and give your approval to what is right, because you have been instructed from the Torah, and if you have persuaded yourself that you are a guide to the blind, a light in the darkness, an instructor for the spiritually unaware, and a teacher of children, since in the Torah you have the embodiment of knowledge and truth, then you who teach others, don't you teach yourself? Preaching, thou shalt not steal, do you steal? Saying, thou shalt not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? Detesting idols, do you commit adulterous acts? You who take such pride in Torah, do you, by disobeying the Torah, dishonor God? As it says in the Tanakh, for it is because of you that God's name is blasphemed by the Gentiles. For circumcision is indeed of value if you do what Torah says, but if you're a transgressor of Torah, your circumcision has become uncircumcision. Therefore, if an uncircumcised man keeps the righteous requirements of the Torah, won't his uncircumcision be counted as circumcision? Indeed, the man who is physically uncircumcised but obeys the Torah will stand as a judgment on you who've had a circumcision ceremony and have Torah written out, but you violate it. For the real Jew is not merely Jewish outwardly. True circumcision is not only external and physical, on the contrary. The real Jew is one inwardly. True circumcision is of the heart, spiritual, not literal, so that his praise comes not from other people, but from God. Moving on to chapter 3. Then what advantage has the Jew? What's the value of being circumcised? Much in every way. In the first place, the Jews were entrusted with the very words of God. If some of them were unfaithful, so what? Does their faithlessness cancel God's faithfulness? Heaven forbid. God would be true even if everyone were a liar, as the Tanakh says, so that you, God, may be proved right in your words and win the verdict when you are put on trial. Sometimes Christians tend towards overgeneralizing and taking a scientific, rational view of the Bible, whereby all things must be either or. Well, that's not how God operates. Here in Romans, it's explained that just because many Jews didn't follow God's plan of salvation for them to its logical conclusion, doesn't cancel God's plan. And it doesn't cancel His faithfulness towards them. Further, we need to begin to understand that long before Israel was created on earth, the heavenly ideal of Israel, which was God's principles being lived out among humans, already existed. Israel was created on earth to serve God by recording these laws and principles and then living them out, demonstrating these ideals so that all mankind would witness and then under certain conditions benefit by this heavenly ideal. Israel succeeded to some degree. They failed to some degree. The Jew that kept to this heavenly ideal, according to Paul, is the one who accepts Yeshua. the Messiah that Jehovah sent them. And Paul further explains that Jews who kept to that heavenly ideal, he labels as true Jews. Not my words, it's Paul's words. True Jews from a heavenly perspective. Now conversely, the Jew that simply did the rituals and all these observances apart from a true love and trust in God and rejects God's Messiah remains physically a Jew, but he's failed in his purpose as part of God's set-apart people. But another concept's also introduced. That of a Gentile who trusts in Israel's Messiah, Yeshua, and thus strives for the heavenly ideal. This Gentile, what today we'd call a saved person, a believer, Christian, is lumped into the category that Paul labels the true Jew. Again, not that a Gentile suddenly has Hebrew genes implanted in him, but rather that this Gentile is viewed by God as a member of those people who reflect the heavenly ideal of Israel. Now, this notion should be no more difficult for us to understand than the well-entrenched and correct Christian principle that when we are saved by the blood of Yeshua's sacrifice, God no longer sees us as sinful men and women. Rather, he sees us as pure and clean. Now, the reality is, though, we still have evil in us. We are going to continue to sin even though we don't want to sometimes. And we're going to fight to our deaths the urge to do wrong against God. Our DNA has not changed. We're still completely human. There are old ways of thinking that are still in there, even with our new knowledge of God. Yet the Father chooses, because of our faith in His Son, to see us as free from sin. He sees us as justified regardless of the physical reality of our corrupted flesh and our mind. Now, another way God chooses to see Gentile believers is as those who possess the attributes of the people that were intended to embody that heavenly ideal. That's Israel. We're not Jews. But in a certain sense, He chooses to see us that way. Now, we're reminded again and again in the Bible of what a debt of gratitude Gentile believers owe Israel. Not just a feeling of gratitude, but an action of expressing that gratitude in tangible ways. Tonight, take a half hour. It's all it'll take you, probably less. Read through Romans 9, 10, and 11. Read the chapters one right after the other. Disregard the chapter markers. Because Romans is just one exceptionally long letter. Put aside all the allegorical teaching you've ever heard about these chapters. Instead, just take it at face value, just as it was intended to be taken. It will make the spiritual grafting in process of Gentiles into Israel quite clear and unequivocal to you. I want to state something else. An everlasting God principle is being made visible and plain by means of the brazen altar for everybody to see. And it's this: without a blood sacrifice, there is no atonement for sin. That's it. It's the one and only way. This constant, day in, day out, sacrificing at the altar was a visible, it was an awful reminder to the people of Israel of this principle. I suspect, though, that just as some of us can speak of Jesus' sacrifice of himself, I don't know, kind of in a removed, matter-of-fact way, perhaps some of those Israelites ceased choking back tears caused by the pitiful bleeding of those countless, harmless, innocent sheep and cattle and goats that were slaughtered on their behalf. Of the millions of birds that had their necks wrung. Those enormous bulls that had to be wrestled against their will as they were tied up, and as those bulls resisted having their throats slit and their lives ended. Doesn't sound very pretty, does it? It wasn't pretty. But to the average Israelite who regularly witnessed the sacrificial process, it must have resulted in a most bittersweet understanding of the truth of it all. There is no atonement for sin without the loss of life, without a blood sacrifice. There is no other way. The bitterness was in the reality of this seemingly endless stream of blood that flowed from that altar. The sweetness was in knowing that this was all arranged by a most merciful, gracious God so that the Hebrews' own lives could be spared, so that they could have an ongoing relationship with the holy God of the universe. Oh, but the cost of it was so great. Perhaps that Mel Gibson film, The Passion, was the modern day visual element we need to help us understand the horror of Yeshua's last hours of life. I know I winced. I turned my face away from that movie many times, trying not to see the blood splattered, smeared all over the pavement. But folks, that's the horrible truth about sacrifice. Sacrifice is not lovely. Those animals' deaths on the altar were not peaceful. They were not easy and sterile. They weren't done in private. They were noisy, messy, foul-smelling, gut-wrenching. Those who brought their animals to sacrifice either had to do the deed themselves or in conjunction with a priest. There was no shrinking away from it. You couldn't separate yourself. You couldn't hide from your duty. Their sin, our sin, brings a dreadful price with it. Thank God there's no further need for a brazen altar. Well, beginning in verse 20, the fuel for the tabernacle menorah is discussed. It is to be from pure olive oil, refined so it's the very best. Here is the instruction that the lights of the menorah are to burn day and night. And it's reiterated that the menorah is to be placed outside of the curtain, the veil, the paroquet that separates the Holy of Holies from the holy place. In other words, it's to be placed inside the holy place, not the Holy of Holies. And Aaron and his sons are to tend it. I want to just mention that Aaron does not represent the entire Levite tribe. He is just one of several clans within the tribe of Levi. Other Levite clans will be selected for certain kinds of service and duties for the tabernacle. For instance, only from Aaron's direct descendants can come the high priest. And just as much, those who tend the menorah also must come from Aaron's line. Other clans of Levites not attached to Aaron will be identified as responsible for some other specific duties. Well, notice in the last verse of chapter 27 that the use of the menorah and the specific clan of the Levites who have been assigned to tend to it are to be a permanent regulation. Obviously, however, there were at least 2 times in Israel's history when this regulation was simply undoable. The first time was during their exile to Babylon, and the second time began with the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, and it continues on until this day. The time is near when the temple's going to be rebuilt in Jerusalem and on the Temple Mount that is today occupied by a Muslim mosque and a shrine. And the menorah will once again burn up there. But the only reason for believers to hope for this incredible event to happen is because it means that the return of Christ will be literally weeks and months away, as will the end of the world as we know it. Well, reopen your Bibles. We're just going to read 5 verses in Exodus chapter 28. Exodus chapter 28. We're just going to read the first 5 verses of that chapter. If you have a complete Jewish Bible, it's page 91. You are to summon your brother Aaron and his sons to come from among the people of Israel to you, so they could serve me as Kohanim, as priests. Aaron and his sons Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. You are to make for your brother Aaron garments set apart for serving God, expressing dignity and splendor. Speak to all the craftsmen to whom I have given the spirit of wisdom, and have them make Aaron's garments to set him apart for me, so that he can serve me in the office of Kohen, of priest, meaning high priest. The garments they are to make are these: a breastplate, a ritual vest, a robe, a checkered tunic, a turban, and a sash. They are to make holy garments for your brother Aaron and his sons, so that he can serve me in the office of priest. They are to use gold, blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, and fine linen. Well, after much preparation, Jehovah God makes the somewhat anticlimactic pronouncement that Aaron and his sons, Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar, have been chosen and set apart to be Kohanim, be priests. And at the same time, God instructs Moses that special garments are to be made for these priests, which sets them apart from all other Israelites. Now we're told in verse 2 that Aaron's clothing, in light of his exalted position as the first high priest, they're to be more than special. They are to reflect, as far as is possible, God's own glory and dignity and splendor. Special clothing used for the priestly sect was nothing new to the various Middle Eastern cultures, but it was new for Israel. Because up to this point in their history, by now the line of Israel, Jacob was about 6 centuries old. They had no official priests. Whatever their worship had been, up until the Exodus in Mount Sinai, it must have been very simple, personal, and frankly, not very focused. The Hebrews were subjected to Egypt's gods, Egypt's religious system, for most of their history as a people. Therefore, they adopted, somewhat subconsciously, I suppose, the general understanding of how gods and religion worked. That is, the Egyptian religious system became the lens through which Israel viewed the spirit world. So it's no wonder that Jehovah was so precise, so definite, so uncompromising as his instructions to Israel of just what true worship was to consist of and what it was not to consist of what true justice is and it is not, who God is, that he is one, and that each people or nation did not have their own real and actual God dedicated just to them. And it took many years after Mount Sinai for Israel to get all of this reasonably straight in their minds. And still, all throughout history, right on up to Christ, Israel had grievous lapses into idolatry. Well, now that Jehovah has designated that part of Israel, the tribes of Levi, that was to be set aside for service to him as priest, God left little detail of worship and service to be decided by men, even right down to what the priests were to wear. Now, I want to be clear. These garments were to be worn only during the Levites' time of service in the tabernacle. When they were not on duty, they wore what everybody else wore. Now we're going to look primarily at what the high priest wore, because his garments were incredibly full of teaching and symbolism. And because all throughout the Old and New Testaments, we will hear of certain pieces of his uniform, each of which carried a definite meaning. I want to tell you right up front that the high priest's garments were marvelously prophetic as well. Before we do that, though, let's just have a general understanding of what the regular Levite priests wore. It was a simple white linen outfit. It consisted of a tunic, a turban that was called a mitre, a belt-like assembly called a girdle, and breeches, which are pants that kind of served like underwear. White symbolizes righteous impurity. And next week, we will look at what the high priest was assigned to wear and everything that it meant.
Yeshua.